for it. I don't understand what the deal space is here when their pay-fors are considered non-starters by you guys and your pay-fors are considered non-starters by theirs.
Well, this is a big week ahead, Phil. So big week for someone who covered Capitol Hill and is now covering the White House. Look, I think the president's red lines are inaction and are anything that would raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year. Those are not areas where he is going to move. He is quite open, as is evidenced by the fact that he invited Senator Capito and a group of members to meet with him in the White House later this week. He's very open to having a discussion about where we can find agreement, where we can move forward. And he has been encouraged by the spirit in which Senator Capito and other Republican colleagues are engaging with him. And he's hopeful that the meeting will be constructive. Now, you're right, and what you touched on, which is an interesting piece of this, is that the disagreement is really about the pay-fors. There is agreement about the need to modernize our infrastructure, about the need to do more to create jobs in the economy. And he's looking forward to hearing what additional ideas they may have.
One more quick one. I understand where you guys and the Fed are, that inflation right now is transitory if it pops to the degree that it does. The jobs report kind of was a reminder that we don't necessarily have a roadmap for coming out of a once-in-a-century pandemic economically. Are you guys concerned about what would happen if you're wrong and it's not transitory and this ends up being an actual real problem in the weeks or months ahead when it comes to inflation?
Well, let me first say that our economic team watches this incredibly closely, including our Secretary of Treasury, who has an expansive background in watching inflation. And so we have confidence in both their assessments to date and also the fact that they will watch this as we continue to assess the state of our economy. I will say that, and the President will talk about this shortly, I should say, later this afternoon, that his view is that we've always believed that there would be ups and downs in our jobs reports. That is historically how it has gone. That there are a number of factors that contribute to it being a challenge for people to hire and people to rejoin the workforce. And there are steps we can take, and this is what he will talk about in his remarks as a government. We've obviously taken a number of those steps, including passing the American Rescue Plan, but there are a number of barriers to work. The biggest barriers we've seen: affordability of childcare, schools reopening, vaccinations is actually a huge factor. So when you dig into this data, which obviously we've done over the last couple of days, one interesting thing that struck the president as interesting is that the week of April 12th, which is the week that the data was compiled for the April jobs report was collected, at that point, only 18% of 18 to 64-year-olds were fully vaccinated. And as of May 9th, it's risen to 34%. And the 7-day moving average of positive COVID cases was 40% higher in mid-April than May 8th. Last week when the data was compiled for next month. So all I'm conveying is there are a range of factors. He'll talk about announcements on state and local funding, how that will be distributed, which will help keep police, firefighters, and others on the job. He'll talk about delivering assistance to restaurants, which is where we see major opportunity for employment or rehiring. He'll talk about providing guidance to child care centers, which will help ensure that funding gets out the door to cover child costs. He'll talk about the employee retention tax credit, which will hopefully help small and medium-sized businesses. But he also believes that there are steps businesses need to take, which he'll also talk about. Employers can get people vaccinated. They can pay people a decent wage. These larger companies have received $1.4 trillion in money. They can do a better job of paying a decent wage to bring people back into the workforce. And so, there's a lot of steps different entities can take, and that's where he'll discuss this afternoon and where he thinks the focus should be. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two topics really quick. First, on ethics waivers. The White House apparently had ethics restrictions that were preventing officials who work here from communicating with the unions they worked at previously, and they waived them for somebody at OMB and somebody at the Made in America office. And I'm curious why that happened.
Well, first, since you gave me the opportunity, I will reiterate that this administration the president signed an executive order requiring all appointees across the federal government to sign the most stringent ethics code ever adopted by any White House. So as you referred to, in the narrowest circumstances when necessary and in the public's interest, the order authorizes agencies to grant limited waivers in consultation with White House counsel's office, including in the cases you're citing. President, of course, has stood stood strong for unions throughout his career, and he's proud to have leading labor voices in the White House. And there are circumstances, very, very limited, where it is in the interests of governing, in the interest of getting work done for the American people, to issue these waivers.
And then on the economy, so employment only rose by about 266,000 jobs in April out of 7.4 million or so job openings. How does the White House know that people are just choosing not to apply for jobs because the extra unemployment benefits are so good?
Well, first, let me say that we have looked at the data, and Secretary Yellen referred to this on Friday, or talked about this on Friday. We don't see much evidence that the extra unemployment insurance is a major driver in people not rejoining the workforce. We actually see the data, and our analysis shows that lack of vaccination, the lower rate, which is why I referred to the data and the week that it was taken, it has an impact. Child care has an impact. Schools reopening has an impact. But there is also the need to pay a livable working wage. And that's one of the reasons the president will talk about that this afternoon.
But as Bank of America economists who are cited in a Bloomberg story say, anybody making less than $32,000 a year is better off financially just taking the unemployment benefit. So is the White House creating an incentive just to stay home?
Well, again, the majority of economists, internally and externally of the White House, don't feel that unemployment insurance, something that was done at a time where to help unemployed people get through a very difficult economic downturn during a pandemic, is a major driver in our unemployment data. That there are other factors, bigger factors, that have been contributing to the numbers we saw on Friday. That's what we're working to address, and that's where we think our solution should be focused.
Just last one really quick. The Commerce Secretary says the main reason that people are staying home is fear. How does the White House know that people are scared? What is that based on?
Well, I think what she was referring to is the fact that there was a much lower vaccination rate just a month ago, and that people are fearful about getting sick. They are fearful about whether they're going to have the conditions to be healthy, whether they can send their kids to a child care center, whether there is a child care center. So those are all factors that are consistent with the examples and reasons I just provided. Go ahead, Josh.
You mentioned if you're monitoring inflation, and that with the jobs report you expected sort of, lumpy reports from month to month. Do you expect the same thing with the inflation report? Is the White House bracing for kind of an eye-popping top-line number given the base effects that it will be going off of, or are you not sort of cautioning that? Are you worried people will overreact to the one number that will come on Wednesday?
Well, obviously our analysis is going to be done by our economic experts. They continue to convey that they believe the impact will be temporary, transitory, however you want to refer to it. But they're looking at it closely, but I don't have any projections on that to make from here today.
Can I ask a little bit more about vaccinations? The average has dropped from about 3.4 million 4 weeks ago a day to about 2 million. It looks like it's sort of leveled off there, declining steadily. Is that where you expect it to continue? Do you expect it to keep coming down? And what are the factors that you think are driving that pretty substantial drop over the past month or so?
Sure. Well, we always expected we'd be in a different phase. And we were at a phase just several weeks ago, and you cover this closely, so you know well, where there was such a demand for the vaccine. People were eager to get their appointment. They had vaccine T-shirts. They were doing selfies. We are now at the point which we always knew we would be at, where the supply has increased, has exceeded the demand, and it means we have to work extra hard to get into communities, to have partnerships with local doctors, with primary care physicians, to expand access, expand mobile units that are going into communities to get the supply out to people. We have hit a higher number than I think most people anticipated at this point since the president was inaugurated. The number of people who have been vaccinated, who have received their first dose and are hopefully on their way to their second dose. So we knew we would be in this phase, and we knew we'd be in a phase where it'd be more difficult because we need to increase access, which we've been focused on doing from the beginning, and continue to increase confidence. We have seen progress in both areas.
2 weeks ago, the 10 million doses of AstraZeneca that were being reviewed by the FDA. Do you have an update on that at all? Are they still reviewing it?
They are still reviewing it. We don't have an update quite yet, and we're working to hopefully have more for you on what how our approach and what our assessment will be of how those doses will be distributed.
Well, quick housekeeping. Tomorrow's meeting, governors, is that virtual or are they all coming?
Virtual.
virtual meeting.
Yeah.
Can you give us finally
Yeah.
a sense of whether you're considering easing travel restrictions, particularly to Europe or whatever, for vaccinated people? Where's the U.S. thinking on that?
I don't have anything to preview on that at this point in time. Go ahead, David.
Back to this interesting question on the unemployment benefits. One suggestion the Republicans have been making is end those benefits earlier than the current plan, which I think is the end of September, and use that money to go into infrastructure. Is that being taken up by your side?
I'm certain they will bring many ideas to the meetings later this week. That may be one of them. But again, I think it's important to note that we don't see the unemployment benefits as a major driver in the jobs numbers. We see there being a number of other factors that have a larger impact, including the pace of vaccination just a month ago, the child care impacts, the need to get more money out into state and local communities. So that's where our focus is going to be. And for us, it's important that we continue to remain solutions-oriented on areas where we feel can be most beneficial to the economy and not be moved by talking points. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. The White House sent out earlier that the president's meeting later today with Senator Harper and Senator Manchin. I was wondering if you could just give us a preview of what they plan to discuss and why those two senators in particular were invited, or able to be virtual. I don't know.
Sure. Well, I would expect the president will have, you already know, he has a number of meetings scheduled this week, one with a bipartisan bicameral leadership meeting on Wednesday. He also has the meeting with Senator Capito and a group of Republican senators on Thursday. So these are just examples of two senators, additional members he'll be meeting with to discuss the American Jobs Plan, discuss the path forward, and I'm not sure we'll have a big readout afterwards, but it's just a part of his ongoing outreach.
And then given, just quickly, you said, what a big week it is. He has so many meetings with so many lawmakers. Is this sort of, I guess, like a defining week, would you say, for how things are going to proceed on the jobs plan, the families plan? Is the White House sort of, setting any kind of deadline? You've mentioned Memorial Day as a time to see progress. I'm curious, where you kind of go after this week, given all the meetings that are scheduled.
The president would still like to see progress by Memorial Day and would like to sign the bills into law this summer. That hasn't changed, but we don't have a new deadline. But of course, a number of meetings, and the Senate's back, and there'll be all sorts of conversations happening this week. Sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
Do you get a sense that as the president's going to have his first meeting with Kevin McCarthy here in that leadership meeting you talked about, obviously the House Republicans have some of their own internal matters going on. Does the president think any discord they are having has an influence or comes into the meetings that he will have with leadership? Does that affect how he views sitting down with them at all?
No. The president knows that there is some introspection going on in the Republican Party right now, and a determination about who they're going to be, who they want to lead them, and what they want to represent moving forward. He's not going to focus on that. He also believes that the American people did not elect him to accept improbability or impossibility of working in a bipartisan manner. So the role he can play as President of the United States is to continue to seek ways to work together. And the fact is we are continuing to work, even with the family excitement that's happening on the other side of the aisle. We are continuing to work with Republicans on a range of issues. National security. We passed our we confirmed our cabinet in a faster pace since Reagan. We're working to increase our competition. There are a lot of ways we're working with Republicans, even as they're determining who they are moving forward. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you, Jen. Both German Chancellor Merkel and French President Macron have expressed their concerns over U.S. policy towards vaccine. They've basically been underlying the need for more exports, be it for the vaccine itself or the components. Does the President understand their frustration? And more broadly, do you think he underestimated the negative reactions around the world?
Well, let me first say that the President's commitment to a global COVID-19 response has been steadfast and consistent since day one, when we made the decision to rejoin the WHO. We understand that the virus knows no borders, that it is important for the United States to continue to play a central role in addressing the global pandemic. We've invested more than any other country in COVAX, and we're pushing other countries to invest more in the program to get vaccines to developing countries. We're working to boost global production through partnerships like the Quad Partnership. Moderna and Pfizer have announced plans and intentions to increase supply and get it out to the global community. And of course, we've announced that we are going to share 60 million doses, 10 million of which, as Josh referred to or alluded to earlier, will be hopefully approved by the FDA soon. So there's no question we're playing a role. We will continue to play an increased role in efforts to address the pandemic and get the pandemic under control. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you, Jen. Speaking of NATO's eastern flank, the important part of security system in the Central and Eastern Europe was supposed to be U.S. missile defense site in Poland. The project stalled during the previous administration. It has been delayed twice. Is President Biden committed to completing the project?
I don't have anything to preview about a bilateral project or project in Poland at this point in time. The president addressed this group today. He provided remarks. It's obviously a group of 9 countries, so it was not focused on one particular country, even though I know the president of Poland was a co-host of the event. I can certainly follow up with our national security team and see if there's more to report. Go ahead.
We're seeing hesitancy in some areas to resume activities that even the CDC says are safe. Not wearing a mask outside if you're fully vaccinated, or even in particular in-person schooling. Does the administration have a strategy on helping cure those anxieties around the country and make sure that the reopening can go as smoothly as possible?
The reopening of schools. Well, we actually saw data that came out just last week that showed more than 50% of schools are open 5 days a week, and that data is from March. So we're actually seeing increasing numbers as schools receive the American Rescue Plan funding and as they apply the mitigation measures. So I'm not sure, but was there specific data you were referring to, or?
It's not just the reopening schools, but getting families confident that sending their children to those schools is safe.
Sure. This is certainly, as we look to wait for and hope for, of course, approval of one of the vaccines to be safe for 12 to 15-year-olds. I know this is something that's on the minds of parents around the country. My kids are not quite that old, but I certainly relate to and understand that. And we will continue to do what we have done with a range of communities across the country where there has been issues with confidence, whether it's communities of color, where there has been a massive increase in confidence as more people get vaccinated, or more conservative communities where we've also seen an increase in confidence as more people in communities are vaccinated. So one of the reasons that we are partnering with primary care physicians and local doctors is because we know that is an effective way, not just with adults, but with parents, to help address questions they have, concerns they have about whether or not getting the vaccine, taking the vaccine for their kids is safe, is effective, and is necessary. And that is a program we will continue to increase our investment in. I think we'll have more to say about that in the coming days. Sorry, I was trying to understand your question. Go ahead.
Thanks. To go back to the colonial pipeline, if the U.S. does begin to see a shortage of supply, would you consider waiving the Jones Act?
So as Dr. Sherwood Randall alluded to, we have an interagency process that was stood up this weekend and is meeting regularly, many times a day, about a range of options. I'm not going to get ahead of those options, and at this point in time, I would just reiterate, we don't see a supply issue. Go ahead in the back.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. The first is does the president have a sense of how many Democrats are fully on board with the $4 trillion worth of plans right now, given that he's meeting with these 2 Democratic senators? And is there any readjustment happening with the jobs plan or the families plan because of the disappointing jobs report last week?
Well, I would first say that the president has been regularly discussing with not just Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer, but a range of members. I should say also senior members of the White House team have primarily been playing this role, have had dozens and dozens of meetings and engagements and discussions about these proposals and what's important to a variety of members. As you know, Yamiche, there are some members we've been talking about a lot who want to see a smaller package, some want to see a larger package. So there's a range of points of view that will certainly continue to be a part of the discussion. This meeting with bipartisan leaders on Wednesday, of course, the jobs plan will be a part of it. They'll also discuss a range of issues and a range of items on the agenda during that meeting. But the discussions are ongoing, and there are a range of viewpoints that we're intaking on, we're answering questions, and that is certainly not just with Republicans, it's with a range of Democrats as well.
Just want to make sure, the question was basically how many Democrats, and does the president have a sense that he could pass it at least with Democrat support right now?
Well, again, Yamiche, what I was conveying is that there are a range of Democrats and Republicans who have different ideas about what the priorities are, what they should be. Some may even want different components of the package to be bigger. Some may want it to be smaller. So all of that is being assessed as we have a discussion. There isn't a bill that's going to the floor next week. We're in the early sausage-making stage of the discussion with members of both parties.
And then two other quick questions. The first is just on policing. Would the president sign a bill that didn't include an end to qualified immunity when it came to policing? Jim Clyburn is supporting that now. What's the president's stance on qualified immunity?
The president is eager to see what the outcome of negotiations are, and he certainly trusts in the leadership of Congresswoman Bass, Senator Booker, but his focus is on his hope that he can sign the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act into law on May 25th. If I'm getting the date correct, and we're not going to get ahead of those negotiations.
So he doesn't have a stance right now that he would say on
We're not going to take a stance in the middle of the negotiations.
And the last question I have is on schooling. I saw some numbers that said Black children, or half of them have gone back to school. About 2/3 of Asian American children have enrolled in remote school, compared to about 20% of white students. Essentially, the point is that Black, Latino, and Asian students aren't going back to school at the same rates as white students. There are a lot of people who are worried about that equity gap. Does the administration have a goal and a number in mind for how this should be playing out when it comes to students and who's going back to school, and what's the aim there?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges is that the data is from March. And so the data at this point is a month and a half old. It still shows encouraging signs, but as you pointed out there, Yamiche, it's not nearly where we want it to be at the end, at the conclusion of this. And the focus of Secretary Cardona and on our Department of Education is ensuring we're getting these funds out to the communities that need it in order to reopen as quickly as possible, 5 days a week. There are also entities that I think one of your colleagues over here asked about in terms of concerns about the vaccine and safety and efficacy that we need to continue to address at the same time as well. So we will continue to dig into the data. One of the things Secretary Cardona has been focused on is connecting schools and best practices so that they can learn, is it a funding issue, is it addressing other challenges issue, and that school districts and schools can learn from each other. But our goal and objective is to have all schools open 5 days a week, and that's what we're working toward. And we're not going to be satisfied until we get there. I know that I think you have to gather, or maybe we're even late for that, so I'm going to wrap this up, but we'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.